I still remember the feeling of unease as I stepped into the morgue for the first time. It was a chilly autumn morning, and the fluorescent lights overhead cast an eerie glow on the rows of steel bodies lined up like sentinels. The air was heavy with the scent of formaldehyde and disinfectant, a pungent aroma that always seemed to cling to me like a bad habit. As a young medical examiner, I had worked in this morgue for years, but there was something about this particular case that made my skin crawl. The body lay on the examination table, wrapped in a white sheet with a single fold at the neck. The face was obscured, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I was looking at a stranger's corpse. The eyes seemed to be staring right through me, their lids frozen in a perpetual blink. I tried to focus on the task at hand, performing an autopsy to determine the cause of death, but my mind kept wandering back to the unsettling atmosphere of the morgue. It started with small things: the creaking of the old wooden floorboards beneath my feet, the faint hum of the ventilation system, and the way the shadows seemed to twist and writhe on the walls like living things. I had always dismissed it as mere paranoia, but today something felt different. The air felt thick and heavy, like a physical presence that was watching me. As I began to prepare the body for examination, I noticed that the sheet covering the corpse seemed to be slightly askew. I tried to brush it off as a minor detail, but my curiosity got the better of me. I gently adjusted the fold, and as I did, I caught a glimpse of something that made my blood run cold. The eyes, they were not staring at me anymore. The lids had opened, revealing two empty black holes that seemed to suck all the light out of the room. I stumbled backward, my heart racing in my chest, and that's when I knew I was in trouble. As the days passed, I found myself increasingly fascinated by the unexplained events that had occurred in the morgue. The open eyes seemed to haunt my dreams, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me from the shadows. I began to conduct further investigations, scouring the morgue's records for any information about the deceased. The name on the file was Emily Wilson, a 25-year-old woman who had been pronounced dead 6 months prior. Her cause of death was listed as a heart attack, but I knew that was just a cover story. There was something more to it, something that I couldn't quite put my finger on. I spent hours poring over the medical reports, looking for any clues that might lead me to the truth. The more I read, the more I became convinced that Emily's death was not what it seemed. She had a history of mental illness, but her records showed no signs of suicidal ideation or depression. It was as if she had been killed by someone who knew her intimately, someone who had access to her innermost thoughts and desires. I felt a shiver run down my spine as I realized that I might be dealing with something far more sinister than I had initially thought. The morgue's records were a treasure trove of information, but they also seemed to hold secrets and lies that could unravel at any moment. As I delved deeper into the case, I began to feel like I was walking on thin ice. One wrong move, and I would be consumed by the very darkness I was trying to uncover. As night began to fall, the morgue took on a life of its own. The fluorescent lights overhead seemed to flicker and dim, casting eerie shadows on the walls. I had grown accustomed to working late hours, but tonight felt different. It was as if the darkness itself was watching me, waiting for me to make a mistake. I tried to focus on my work, but my eyes kept drifting back to Emily's body on the examination table. The open eyes seemed to be staring at me, and I could have sworn I saw them blink once, twice, before going still again. I shivered, despite myself, and told myself it was just my imagination playing tricks on me. But as the hours ticked by, I began to experience strange occurrences that couldn't be explained. The lights would flicker and die, only to come back on with a jolt of electricity. I heard whispers in the ventilation system, soft and raspy voices that seemed to be speaking an unknown language. And then there were the shadows. They moved and twisted on their own, like living things. I tried to convince myself it was just the wind outside or my imagination, but deep down, I knew something more sinister was at play. The morgue had always been a place of death and decay, but tonight it felt like it was becoming a place of darkness and malevolence. I knew then that I had to get out of there, to leave the morgue and its secrets behind. But as I turned to leave, I saw something that made my blood run cold. Emily's body was no longer alone on the examination table. As I approached the examination table, my heart sank. Emily's body was no longer alone. A second body lay on the table beside her, wrapped in a different type of cloth. The face was unfamiliar, but the eyes were what caught my attention. They were the same black holes that had stared at me earlier, and for a moment I thought I was looking at myself. But it couldn't be. This was someone else entirely. The body on the table seemed to be in a different state of decay than Emily's. It was as if time had slowed down for this person, preserving their features in a twisted, macabre pose. I felt a wave of nausea wash over me as I took in the scene before me. Who was this person? How did they end up on my table? And what did it have to do with Emily's death? I knew I had to examine the body closer, but my stomach churned at the thought. As I began to unwrap the cloth, a cold breeze swept past me, extinguishing the lights in the morgue. The darkness was absolute, and I was plunged into a world of shadows. When the lights flickered back on, I saw that the second body had changed. Its face now bore an eerie resemblance to Emily's. The eyes still stared at me with an unblinking gaze, and I knew then that I was dealing with something far more sinister than I could have ever imagined. As the days passed, I found myself becoming increasingly entangled in a web of doubt and fear. The discovery of the second body had shaken me to my core, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I was in over my head. Every time I looked at Emily's face, I saw something that made me question my own sanity. The resemblance between her and the second body was uncanny, as if they were two sides of the same coin. I began to wonder if I had been wrong about Emily's death all along. Was it possible that she hadn't died from a heart attack after all? That someone had taken her life and then done something even more twisted. The thought sent a chill down my spine, and I couldn't help but feel like I was being watched. Every creak of the old morgue's floorboards made me jump. Every faint whisper in the ventilation system made me spin around, expecting to see someone lurking in the shadows. I knew I had to keep my focus on the case, but it was getting harder by the day. The more I delved into Emily's death, the more I realized that I wasn't just investigating a murder. I was unraveling a dark and sinister web of secrets that went far beyond anything I could have ever imagined. And with every step forward, I felt myself becoming more and more entangled in its grasp. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was losing my grip on reality. Every time I looked at Emily's face, I saw something new. A hint of a smile, a glimmer of eyes that seemed to follow me around the room. It was as if her spirit was haunting me, taunting me with clues that I couldn't quite decipher. The morgue seemed to be shifting and twisting around me, like a funhouse mirror reflecting my own paranoia. I began to wonder if I was just a pawn in some twisted game, designed to unravel the threads of reality itself. Every sound, every creak of the floorboards made me spin around, expecting to see someone lurking in the shadows. The air was thick with the scent of decay and death, but it was also heavy with something else, something sweet and sickly, like rotting fruit. I felt like I was drowning in a sea of madness, unable to find a lifeline to cling to. And then there were the visions. Flickers of images that seemed to flash before my eyes, like snapshots from a camera that had been left on all day. Emily's face, twisted into a grotesque grin, a figure lurking in the shadows, watching me with cold, dead eyes. I knew I was seeing things, but they felt so real that I couldn't help but wonder if I was going mad. Was I trapped in some kind of labyrinthine nightmare from which there was no escape? Or was this just my mind playing tricks on me, trying to drive me over the edge? I didn't know anymore. All I knew was that I had to keep searching for answers, no matter how much my own sanity screamed at me to stop. I was sitting at my desk, going over the case files one last time before calling it a night, when I heard a soft knock at the door. It was a gentle tap, almost like someone didn't want to disturb me. I looked up, expecting to see one of my colleagues, but there was no one there. The knock came again, this time a bit louder. I got up and opened the door, half expecting to find some kind of prankster or a neighbor with a misplaced package. But what I saw took my breath away. On the doorstep, in red letters that seemed to glow in the dim light of the hallway, was a message. Look again at the autopsy report. I felt a shiver run down my spine as I read the words, wondering who could have written them and how they knew so much about my investigation. The message was cryptic, but it sent a spark of excitement through me. Whoever had left this note was trying to tell me something, to nudge me in a certain direction. But what that direction was, I had no idea. I looked around the hallway again, hoping to catch a glimpse of my mysterious sender, but there was no one there. The message was as clear as day, and yet it left me with more questions than answers. Who was behind this? And what did they know about Emily's death that I didn't? I took a deep breath and made a decision. I would look again at the autopsy report, see if there was anything I had missed before. It was a long shot, but sometimes it was the only way to get closer to the truth. I spent the rest of the night poring over the autopsy report, searching for any clue that might lead me to the truth. But the more I read, the more confused I became. The same inconsistencies and discrepancies that had nagged at me before seemed to multiply, like a game of whack-a-mole where no matter how hard I hit one down, two more would pop up in its place. I felt like I was getting nowhere, like I was trapped in some kind of never-ending nightmare from which I couldn't wake up. The darkness outside my window seemed to be closing in on me, suffocating me with an oppressive weight that made it hard to breathe. I knew I had to keep going, for Emily's sake, but every step felt like a struggle against the tide. I was running out of time, and the longer I waited, the more likely it was that someone or something would take advantage of my distraction. The thought sent a shiver down my spine, and I knew I had to get moving. But as I stood up, my legs felt like lead, as if they were weighted down by an invisible anchor. I stumbled towards the door, fumbling for the light switch as I went. The fluorescent lights above me flickered to life, casting a harsh glare over everything that seemed to make the shadows outside even darker. I took a deep breath and pushed open the door, stepping out into the night air like a man walking off a cliff. The city streets were empty and silent, the only sound the soft hum of the streetlights overhead. I felt like I was the only person left in the world, with no one to turn to but myself. And that thought sent me tumbling down a rabbit hole of desperation and fear, from which there was no escape. I knew I had to confront the sinister force head-on if I wanted to uncover the truth about Emily's death. The darkness outside seemed to be closing in on me, but I steeled myself and walked towards it with determination. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, but I refused to let fear get the better of me. As I turned a corner, I saw a figure standing under the streetlight. It was tall and imposing, casting a long shadow on the ground. My heart skipped a beat as our eyes met, and for a moment we just stared at each other. The air was thick with tension, and I could feel my pulse pounding in my ears. Slowly, the figure began to move towards me, its movements deliberate and calculated. I stood my ground, trying to appear braver than I felt. As it drew closer, I saw that it was a woman with piercing green eyes and long, dark hair. She reached out a hand and touched my face, her fingers sending shivers down my spine. "You're getting close," she whispered, her voice low and husky, "but you'll never be close enough." Suddenly, the world around me began to distort and blur, like I was trapped in a funhouse mirror. The woman's eyes seemed to burn with an inner fire, and I felt myself being drawn into their depths. I tried to resist, but it was no use. I was sucked into her gaze, and everything went black. I came to my senses in a dimly lit room with stone walls and a cold, metallic floor. The woman's eyes still burned in my mind, but now they were fading fast. I looked around, taking in my surroundings. I was in some kind of holding cell or interrogation room. There were no windows, just a single door made of thick steel. I stumbled to my feet, testing my strength after the prolonged darkness. The woman's voice echoed in my mind once more. "You're getting close." Close to what? And who was behind this sinister game? I knew I had to keep moving forward if I wanted to uncover the truth. I began to search the room for any clues, scouring every inch of the space. That's when I saw it, a small key hidden in a crack of the floor. It glinted in the faint light, and I felt a surge of determination. This was my chance to escape, to uncover the secrets that had been hidden from me. With shaking hands, I unlocked the door and stepped out into the unknown. The hallways were long and narrow, lined with doors leading to who knew where. I knew I had to keep moving to find the heart of the morgue and unravel its dark secrets. I took a deep breath and set off down the corridor, my footsteps echoing through the silence. Every step brought me closer to the truth, but also further into danger. I was no longer just searching for answers, I was running from them. The woman's eyes still haunted my dreams, and I knew that eventually she would be back. But this time I was ready. I had been searching for answers for what felt like an eternity, navigating the twisted corridors of Morgue 1 and uncovering clues that hinted at a sinister plot. But nothing could have prepared me for what I was about to see. As I turned a corner, I stumbled upon a room that seemed frozen in time. The air was thick with the scent of decay, and the walls were covered in cryptic symbols that seemed to pulse with a malevolent energy. In the center of the room, I saw it, a large metal door adorned with the same symbols I had seen elsewhere in the morgue. But what caught my attention was the sign above the door, Room 314. I felt a chill run down my spine as I realized that this must be where Emily's body had been taken after her autopsy. I approached the door cautiously, wondering what horrors lay beyond. As I reached out to touch the handle, the symbols on the wall seemed to ignite, casting an eerie glow over the room. The metal door creaked open, revealing a chamber filled with rows of steel coffins, each one bearing a name tag with a single word: patient. My heart sank as I realized that this must be where all the missing bodies had been stored. But it was what lay beyond the coffins that made my blood run cold. A figure shrouded in shadows stood at the far end of the room, watching me with an unblinking gaze. As I took a step forward, the figure began to move towards me, its presence filling the room with an unspeakable horror. I tried to scream, but my voice was frozen in my throat. The figure drew closer, its features becoming clearer with each passing moment. It was Emily's face, twisted into a grotesque grin. And then it spoke. "Welcome home," she hissed, her voice like a rusty gate. I stumbled backward, tripping over my own feet as the world around me descended into chaos. The last thing I saw was the figure looming over me, its eyes burning with an otherworldly intensity. I tried to scramble to my feet, but my legs felt like lead. Emily's face loomed over me, her grin stretching across her features like a grotesque parody of a smile. I tried to scream again, but my voice was silenced by some unseen force. The figure began to laugh, its sound echoing through the chamber like the cackling of a madwoman. I felt myself being pulled back down into the darkness, unable to escape the crushing weight of Emily's gaze. Suddenly, the lights flickered and died, plunging me into an inky blackness. I was alone, but I knew that I wasn't safe. The figure was still out there, watching me, waiting for its moment to strike. I stumbled forward, my hands outstretched in front of me like a blind man feeling his way through the dark, but every step seemed to lead me further into the abyss. I heard footsteps behind me, echoing off the walls as they drew closer and closer. The figure was gaining on me, its presence closing in around me like a vice. I knew that I had to keep moving if I wanted to survive, but where could I go? The morgue seemed to stretch out endlessly in every direction, a labyrinth of death and despair from which there was no escape. And then, just when I thought things couldn't get any worse, I heard the sound of a door opening behind me. It was the entrance to the morgue, and it was now open wide enough for the figure to step through. I knew that I had to run, but my legs were frozen in terror. The figure loomed over me, its eyes blazing with an unholy light. And then everything went black once more.